What happens when you start out with a great recipe, but you don't quite understand what the ingredients and techniques are supposed to do? You end up with a bad cocktail, that's what. Welcome to the Cocktail Spirit from Small Screen Network. I'm your host, Robert Hess. We're doing a set of episodes here where we're showing the common mistakes that people might make, whether professional bartenders or home mixologists. One of them is taking a recipe that might be a great recipe, and without understanding exactly why all the ingredients or techniques were coming together in the way they were, they end up making a bad cocktail. Now, there's a lot of possible recipes this might happen to, but the one I see it happen the most to is probably one of the oldest recipes out there. It's called the old-fashioned. The old-fashioned is a recipe that calls for spirits of any kind, sugar, water, and bitters. It's a very simple drink, but if you don't understand why all those ingredients are coming together the way they are, you're going to do it wrong. Let's take a look at why. It starts off with the glass itself, believe it or not. Let's take this glass, a standard old-fashioned glass. Technically, this is probably a double old-fashioned glass, but it's an old-fashioned glass. Now, a common drink is going to have 2 ounces in it. So let's take a 2-ounce measure. And pour that in. Now, the old-fashioned, from a volume standpoint, doesn't have much more than that in it. So spirits, we're using a rye whiskey here. Sugar, water, bitters. So I've got sugar water here, and I've got bitters, and I've got a glass here that, unless I really pack it full of ice, is going to look like an empty drink. And that's where the problem actually comes from. Let's see why exactly. Let's add the ice to this drink. We're going to add a couple of cubes of ice. Didn't bring the level up very high. Okay, let's add our simple syrup. Now remember, it's sugar and water, and so I'm combining them together here. I'm going to add a teaspoon of simple syrup. Oh, didn't bring it up very far either. And now I'm going to add my dash of bitters, and the dash of bitters isn't going to do too much. The dash isn't coming out very well. There we go. So here we now have a drink that has all the ingredients in it for a proper old-fashioned, and yet looks half full. Now, the bartender might look at this and say, I'm not going to serve this drink to my customers because it's half full. He looks at the recipe. His recipe called for sugar and water. I use simple syrup instead. And says, oh, it's got water in it. So he grabs his soda gun or whatever and tops it off in order to bring it up and make it a full drink out of it. And hence he makes a bad old-fashioned because he didn't understand that the sugar and the water in the recipe was basically saying, make simple syrup. And simple syrup is equal parts sugar and water. So if you're going to do it with sugar, you add your teaspoon of sugar, and then you add a teaspoon of water, and make your simple syrup in the glass, and you end up with this as an old-fashioned. Now we top that off with a lemon peel, and I'm using a lemon peel because I'm using rye whiskey, and lemon works better with rye. If I was using bourbon, I'd use an orange peel. And that was the original recipe for an old-fashioned. Later on, we're seeing a cherry added. And later on still, much later on, we're seeing people start muddling it together. And that's just simply because they're taking a great recipe and simply riffing on it until the point they almost destroy it. Because all that mangled orange and mangled cherry doesn't do anything for the drink. Whereas a simple twist of lemon in a rye, or a simple twist of orange in a bourbon old-fashioned, make a wonderful drink. So here we start out with a great recipe, and understanding the ingredients and techniques involved, end up with a great drink, the old-fashioned.